Thanks for coming out. So, this is quite a wide-ranging set of talks, and it covers quite a large proportion of medicine, surgery, genetics, pathology, bioengineering. There's a lot of different people in the audience: surgeons, medics, dietitians, students, bioengineers. And there should be something in it for everybody, but at the same time, it'll drift into areas where people will get lost. And I'll try to make it as interesting as possible. So we'll get started. We're going to whiz through this. Basically, arthritis is a huge global problem, much bigger than you'd probably realize. There's over 3.5 million hips and knees done throughout the world every year. It's likely to double over the next 20 years as people live longer and get fatter. Now, one of the interesting things that medics don't even realize, actually, is that the thing that limits the long-term lifespan of a joint replacement is wear debris. You react to your joint replacement as if you'd react to a foreign liver transplant, foreign piece of material. Unfortunately, the more you mobilize, the more you move, you release more wear particles, and this sets off an immune response. And that basically causes bone damage and the components to loosen. Now, because of this, there's been continued innovation through the years by the manufacturers, but this is largely focused on the implants themselves, to the extent that over the last 10 years, there have been over 4,000 different types of knees available to the knee surgeon. There's huge innovation in robotics to improve the surgical alignment. It's over $4 billion at the moment. But there's no real understanding of the immunogenetic response. So people we haven't invested in that. It's quite complicated. Revision joint surgery, if you look there on the left, that's your standard knee. That's your revision knee. It's obviously much more complex. The surgery is demanding. Infection rates are high. Risk of death is much higher. And the return to work is much lower. And because people are getting older, they're getting fatter, we're needing more joint replacements, but we're also needing more revision surgery. So this is a real problem. And there are several papers that literally state that this is a big, big problem for developed health systems. Now, what brought us here today in terms of the company, which is Explant Lab, is quite a long history. Now, there's a lot of you in the room who will have seen pieces of this story. There are people who won't. It is quite interesting. We can only tell it very briefly. But it's linked to a lot of people in the audience. About 15 years ago, I started as a research fellow with Tony Nagel and Simon Jameson. Jameson I used to live with, and Jameson was formulating this Excel database, and every night he was in the office just punching in figures. And I had no idea what he was doing, but actually what happened was that I took over his job a year after, and he'd left us this database of patients who'd received this new prosthesis called the ASR. But Mr. Nagel had noticed that some of these patients were developing pain. Now, these hips were meant to last forever, but unfortunately they were attending theatre, and we were seeing these awful soft tissue reactions, which is metal hypersensitivity. Other terms are alval pseudotumor. We gave the explants to the manufacturer of the prosthesis. They simply said, there's nothing wrong with these prostheses. It's surgical error. It's Tony's fault. He's a bad surgeon. And that's at that point we teamed up with Professor Joyce, who you'll hear from at Newcastle University. I put an email out and I said, is anyone could help us look at these prostheses? So we met Tom, and it was kind of a life-changing meeting where we've continued to work through the years, and this is where the company stems from. In terms of what is an explant, it's simply a removed implant. What do we do with them? When they come to the lab, we use coordinate measure machines, which Tom originally put in a grant for to develop this equipment. And we scan the material, we work out where it used to be, where it is now, and it's no more complicated than just calculating how much metal has been deposited into the patient. What happens is it allows us to do these wear maps, so we can work out how much and from where the material has been removed. And with these devices, which are manufactured from cobalt chrome, and actually almost 60% of all medical implants, orthopedic implants, are manufactured from cobalt chrome, the wear rate of this correlates directly to the blood and serum chromium and cobalt concentrations. So the wear of the prosthesis directly relates to how much metal is circulating in a patient. So during this period, about 100,000 of these implants were put in through the world. There were gross problems. I mean, it's been described as one of the worst orthopedic failings of all time. There was little or no backup, actually. Nobody else really produced any evidence on this. It was very, very strange, and there were no other retrieval centres that looked at this. And this story's been told originally in the New York Times. It's been more recently in the Bleeding Edge on Netflix. Because we were highlighting these issues and we were going to the manufacturer and telling them about it, but they were continuing to sell them, it just turned into an absolute mess, which carries on to this day. With one of the devices, $2.5 billion just in the US alone in terms of litigation. Me and Tony have been all around the world, Ireland just last year, and for 5 or 6 years, Australia, giving the evidence. It's quite a stressful period, but through the process, you know, we earned some medical legal funding, litigation as expert witness, and that allowed us to set up this company to provide this to the NHS. It continues, that was 2016, and this is where it gets slightly troubling, is this was another device. This was a payout for 6 patients. So between 6 patients, they got $1 billion. Contrast that to the same hip in the UK, where we weren't called to give evidence. All the patients lost their case, not defective. And just to reinforce that issue, this was a hip that wasn't manufactured to tolerance. It was on the front page of the Daily Telegraph, shouldn't have left the factory. It's just the fact. No patients got any compensation, and the NHS didn't recover any money for that. With the same hip, it's just endless. We're suing on behalf of the United States government. This case continues where we're trying to sue the company for fraud. But that has been literally 10 years of a legal battle, and we're literally now arguing over a 4th decimal place, and it's getting into just silly territory, millions and millions of dollars. Now, the official view of whether you should actually whether you should look at implants that have been removed from the body, it's obvious logical, it's obviously common sense. We're not talking about just identifying defects. We're talking about identifying defects so we can improve things rather than just sue people. We want to develop, we want to innovate, and we want to get new improved prosthesis. Getting it right first time talks about litigation on the NHS. It talks about the ASR. It says that the ASR cost the NHS £120 million. What it doesn't say is that our research actually got the manufacturer to reimburse the NHS £120 million. There's no mention of that here in this report whatsoever, no mention of explant analysis at all. The regulators say basically you should analyse implants, but still today, almost every implant that's removed from a patient goes in the bin. It's like having a small fault with your iPhone and you just throw it in the bin. You don't actually take it back to the manufacturers to have a look to see if you can improve it. Parliament says that this should be done, but they say the analysis of explanted joints is useful, but the costs and logistics will be very high. They never asked us how much this costs. We've never actually been asked that. So, if we don't get asked, we'll try and reduce the costs, and we'll try and make it so that they have to take this on board. Let's try and do it more effectively, cheaper, etc. We'll move away from metal on metal hips. We'll look at all types of hips, knees, ankles, everything. We managed to get FDA funding from the US. We validated all our wear techniques through the years, a long process, quite difficult process of making sure that everybody's happy that the techniques that we use are accurate. It's endless and fairly dull. These are literally, this paper has been published today on knee replacements. So we are very advanced here in the Northeast. We're the only people in the world actually who can do this analysis. Nowhere else can do this. Increasing the efficiency. This is where we started at North Tees. My dad was chopping up femoral bones as part of the clinical efficacy in terms of the scanning process at North Tees Pathology Lab with us. But now we've moved to a new lab in the centre of town, at the Newcastle Helix, which is next to St James's Park, which is a new science development. We don't own all this building, we're just on the first floor. But you can see it's a very different setup to what we had at the original North Tees site. And my dad he's not working there anymore. Now, what we can do with this as well is we can process implants extremely efficiently, so we can put many more explants through the system using automated equipment. We can also get the explant from the operating theatre within 48 hours, analysed, reported back to the surgeon. The implants are sent to us, they're cleaned and disinfected and sterilised in the in theatre grade equipment there, so we're using that same equipment. We also got financial support from Innovate UK, so we've taken on lab staff, PhD student Shona with Newcastle Uni, post-PhD student Rohan, who's here tonight. We've got some fairly high power management structure now with Emmanuel Echeverry, who used to be Vice President of Pfizer. We have an investor from Hospital Special Surgery in New York, and another CEO board member who sold company to Novartis for 10 billion. And we're going places now, we hope. We also have, now I put this slide together quickly and I realized that the title's a bit creepy, young talent, but you know, I thought I'd keep it just for, there's Matthew Nargle, who you noticed the last name, that's Tony's son. He's now helping us with the machine learning and the data algorithm production, so we're coming full circle. And Nish as well. These are two really great guys who should be with us long term. So to wrap this first talk up, the long-term plan, hopefully, is that no explant should be thrown away. Can we produce it cheaply, effectively? Can we learn? Can we provide a cost-effective service to the NHS? Protect patients and develop new ones? It was going to be slightly negative and say after 10 years we haven't got anywhere, but literally as of last week, a job advert has come out from the NHS for service providers to provide this to the NHS. So finally, we have to apply for that job. Hopefully we will get it. I don't think we've got a lot of competition. And things actually, generally, there's a happy ending to this part of the story, which wasn't a very happy ending last week. Ongoing collaboration with Newcastle Uni, NHS, FDA, as we mentioned, and also a new partnership that we hope to set up from the gene side and the biomarker side with the National Horizon Centre at Darlington, and Vicky Rand is one of the directors there, will be giving a talk about that new centre. Okay, so we're going to move on to the present day. Largely the last talk I did was about historical implants. This is an active problem, and as I mentioned, this research literally got published today. It's for all the knee surgeons in the audience. Now, we know, as we said before, that we want to reduce wear, we want to make implants last longer. So manufacturers are constantly changing the devices, reduce the wear, improve the clinical outcomes. Now, we've looked at knee replacements over the last 5 years now, and we've looked at over 500. It's a hell of a task looking at a knee replacement purely because of the geometry of it. It's not spherical. It's very, very tricky to analyze. It's very hard work. Now, the key thing is with the total knees is that the manufacturers have changed the plastics. So with the thought being that the plastics wear because they're wearing against metal, the plastic loses the battle, the patient develops a reaction to plastic, causes the joint to fail over time. So what do the manufacturers want to do? They want to reduce the wear of the polyethylenes. So they give the polyethylenes various treatments. One of the recent ones is to put vitamin E in there. Now, to give you an idea of the shape and the complexity of the analysis that we do, this is obviously a speeded up video of the type of analysis that we do. It's all automated, so you can put on 8 knees at a time, you can press go, you can come back in an hour and a half and it's done. Now that analysis used to take weeks for one, but we can process very large numbers now. That's the coordinate measure machine going over there. That's taking data all the time, and then we reverse engineer the components. It allows us to produce the wear maps. So this is a left knee, so you're looking down on it. This patient walked on the medial side, the inside of his knee more than the left. Again, medial. But these wear patterns actually, they can be all sorts of different shapes. It's very complex, and it's not actually directly linked, it seems, to tibial alignment. So for me, if we're trying to reduce wear through robots, I just wonder what we're programming the robots. It's just, I don't really get that. This actually seems to follow more of a pattern with preoperative alignment, with preoperative arthritis than post-op component alignment. That's controversial though. Now, here's the good news. The manufacturers are doing well. They are reducing the polyethylene wear. So that's the newer ones, 9 millimeters cubed per year. So they're reducing it by a third compared to 27 roughly with the old ones. So everything's good, yeah? Reduce the wear, reduce the clinical problems. This is the problem, is there's so many links in the chain. You change one, then you can have problems at the top, problems at the bottom. So this is an explanted knee replacement. You change the poly, you might have an effect on the fixation of the tibia. That's going down into the tibia, that's the tray. The polished surface might make a difference. The femoral component fixation might be an issue, even the femoral loading on the there's so many complexities here. And as I said, they don't look at the retrieved implants. So everything's pretty much guesswork, and everything takes so long to develop that actually the new product out is not necessarily informed by the new findings. As I say, there's backside changes with the poly, there's loosening issues, tray damage, and we'll go through them now because I think they're actually they're quite mind-blowing. Here's the backside of a poly insert. So no one's actually ever done this before. That's the coordinate measure machine again scanning. We honestly didn't expect to find anything here. That's not in the articulation as in the contact to the joint. You know, it was just oh shit moment really. These are next gens. There's one of the most popular. There's about 15 million put in these worldwide, and we're seeing with the newer next gens, we see this weird formation where the deformation, where the material rather than wearing is actually bending. So these should be perfectly flat. So if you look at these triathlons here, they're all green. Green is basically good, no change, no wear, no deformation. But do you see these unusual bending patterns, particularly with the next gen and with the attunes? Now with the older designs, red is wear. They used to wear, but now the poly isn't wearing, it's deforming and it's changing the mechanics. And rather than get overcomplicated with those wear maps, this is just what it is. This is a bent polyethylene that's come out of a patient. You can shine a light through it now. That is not normal, that is not intended. And I think there are some manufacturing issue elements there. That's one that's been in 6 years. It's really, really obvious. I mean, you don't need engineering analysis to see that that is now bent. Now, that might be not such an issue. But if you look at the polyethylene with a microscope, and this isn't high-powered microscopy, this is pretty standard that you have in a science lab at school, you'll see all the pits that are occurring underneath the polyethylene, and this is the edge of the poly. That's circumferential pitting. So all the weight, all the loading is going right around the edges. For me, this is linked directly to the loosening rates that we're seeing with tibial trays. We're seeing them particularly with the tunes, and we're seeing them with the next gens in certain batches, it seems. The older PFCs, we don't see this debonding so often, and not as much with the triathlons. Now, this is a really interesting point, and I think, that the surgeons always say, I know what the cause was. I don't really need explant analysis to tell me why it failed. I removed it for a reason, and sometimes the reason will be unexplained pain, which is not really a reason, or it might be loose, or it might not be loose. But this is really concerning to me, is that none of these were actually put down as loose. These were just unexplained pain patients. That has been moving around in the cement mantle for a long, long time. And we see this so oftenly in unexplained cases where the tibial trays are actually moving to the extent where they're being polished on the underside. There's significant material loss there. So are we exchanging plastic wear for metal? Obviously this one, that's a gross loosening case. Here's the scary thing. That's been put in 1 million patients, and that was actually acknowledged by the manufacturer to have a loosening issue, and they've actually gone off and redesigned it and continued selling it, and there's not really been a big kickback to that. Now the question is though, my concern is what's causing that is actually the modification of the poly, not the actual design of the tibia, and I think it's just an exaggerated form of what we're seeing with the other new polys. Tibial tray pitting. Polished surface of the tibias, we're seeing this a lot. So you're looking down on the tibial tray, again, low power microscopy. that is pitting third body wear in the metal. There's significant metal loss coming from the trays. This is totally unexpected. That's the unworn surface there. You see there's no pits anywhere there now compared to the other side. You put them on directly opposite each other. We're exchanging plastic for metal wear, and it's not a good situation. It's not just the Attune, it's not just Next Gen. That's Genesis 2. It's always this teardrop rotational patterns. It's clear that the polyethylene is moving, and it's clear that there's an increase in the frictional torque for me. Vanguard, we have Next Gen there with titanium, you know, really gross changes. That's the Next Gen that was in for 8 years. You can't tell me that's normal or expected. That's really, really unusual. There's another thing about unexplained pain cases. We see this a lot. Now, we see this with Persona, and Persona has a really strong interface between the tray and the poly. So the question is, if you change the fixation of one of the links in the chain, do you just push the problem somewhere else? There's a problem, there's a surgeon in Harrogate who's having a real problem with these, and he's been painted out as an outlier again, typical scenario with the NGR. But that wasn't put down as a loose femur. That was put down as unexplained pain. That wasn't put down as a loose femur. That was put down as unexplained pain. Now, you can pull those off with your fingers. Now, whether that's actually grossly loose and causing a problem, there's certainly a gap there for fluid to get in there and cause corrosion. I won't even go into that because that's going to be too much. The National Joint Registry doesn't show these failures. The question is the modern polyethylenes, are they going to show themselves to be more of a problem long term? Because that is what happens with newly recognized problems. This is another problem, though, when you look at the National Joint Registry figures. It's a recent paper from Mr. Tucker. The National Joint Registry is going to give you accurate information, but it's only going to be as good as how good you look at the data. And basically, this says, you know, if you have a standard knee with the standard product variability, for one device, you have 192 possible combinations. So how can you genuinely look at the data if you're not accounting for all those? It becomes very, very tricky, very complicated. I've quoted Simon Jameson's and Mike Reed's paper here because I think that this is possibly the tip of, I don't know how big an iceberg is or whether there's even an iceberg lurking there. We really don't know. But it doesn't look like these modern polyethylenes, despite their reduced wear, are actually improving patient outcomes and improving survivorship. And I'm going to drag you into the world of genetics, but I don't want you to give up on it. I promise you you'll understand it to an extent. I promise you you'll really like this. The main thing I want to do from this is just get you to ask questions when you see patients. Are they unusual? Are they fitting any patterns? Is there anything we can do here? Is there any further investigations we can do here? Just like with the Explant analysis, it's more about asking questions than giving you, we know everything. We're going to talk about metal hypersensitivity, which none of you really think exists outside of metal and metal world. You know, metal and metal's gone, who cares? We still care. We've done quite an extensive investigation into why patients develop reactions. And the first thing to say is that ALVAL is the same as metal hypersensitivity, is the same as allergy, is the same as pseudotumors, pretty much is the same as ARMD. There's all these different terms used in orthopedics. We're talking about the same thing, essentially. The background, the first patient, 2006, 2007, North Tees, horrendous, soft tissue reaction, pus-like fluid. We start to investigate it. We know that this device wears like hell. We know it's a defective device. We know it's poisoning patients with chromium and cobalt. We start looking further into it. Are the wear levels directly related to the iron levels? Is there a difference between serum and whole blood? Do we go on and on endlessly, publication after publication, trying to pin down why patients get this reaction? Males and females. Females grossly react much more readily to the same amounts of metal debris. That's still actually not fully acknowledged, although it's suspected. It's quite clear from our data that it is. We've done fairly advanced mass spectrometry of metal ion particles and how they bind to albumin. We've really done this to death. So we've got a large background, but we reached the point where we only had about 50% of explanation of why patients develop metal reactions. Only 50% was implant related or wear related, roughly. And here's it in a nutshell. Basically, you get some patients who react like that. You get some patients who basically just get pumped full of metal. They get metal staining, but they don't get severe soft tissue reactions. And the difference is the histology. This, you have, there's a lymphocyte cuff around this blood vessel. The blood vessel becomes destroyed, onion skin. You can see why it's called onion skinning. These are T cells, which people are hearing all about now with COVID. Very potent mediators of inflammatory responses. You'll see this patient who's basically just got metal staining, little or no pain, has no T cell infiltrate. So alval, metal hypersensitivity, the difference is the T cells. You'll notice here, the patient on the left, blood cobalt of 2, is basically the same as a background level. You take the level in here, it'd be not far off that level. This patient here, 80 times that, 160 micrograms per litre, massive wear. So we're going to look at responders and non-responders. You can't look at patients who have the most aggressive reactions and not quantify for the dose exposure. So if you're going to do a genetic investigation of any disease, and I'm going to take a hangover here because you'll be able to get this, you don't test this guy and go, my God, well, he's genetically unusual. He drank all that and he got a bad hangover. That's normal. What you have to do is compare him to these annoying people who can drink all night and wake up fine. And I can see one in the audience smiling away. And then you compare it to this guy. And I'm definitely more along this spectrum here that can drink next to nothing and you get a severe reaction. So that's the approach we're going to use when we're investigating this metal reactions. Now, which genes do you go after? There's a whole human genome there, highly expensive to sequence right down to the, to the amino acid level. Alval, metal hypersensitivity, is linked to age. As the older you get, the same amount of metal exposure you get, the more you react more badly. Females do worse, but as men get older, they react like women. It's likely linked to sex hormones, it's age, gender, it's delayed onset. This has all the hallmarks histologically of an autoimmune disease. HLA genes were our first port of call. HLA genes, chromosome 6, they encode MHC structures. Weirdly, they're crazy. They're related to latitude and longitude. They're the first port of call for liver transplant rejection. They've even been implicated in COVID virus rejections. They're even involved in who you select to multiply with. They've done studies where women literally sniff underpants. Not in Newcastle. Scientific reports, this is how amazing these genes are. MHC genes, HLA, same as. Bats have highly developed MHC complexes. This is why bats can have hosts of coronavirus in them and not respond. It's because they're so advanced genetically. So if we take that approach, what we do here, first part of the study, 2017, 2016, we'll take the patients. This is a massive database, the biggest one in the world. We're going for really unusual patients here. So we're going for the lowest wear, worst reactions. High wear, bad reaction. Sorry, there. High wear, no reaction. You get the point. We're looking at the extremes. Do the genes stand out? I'll come on to that. This is the tough bit. This is the tough bit. It'll be over in a second, but it'll make sense. Albumin is an amazing molecule. It mops up all kinds of toxins. It's huge. It's the most abundant protein in the bloodstream. It basically attaches to nickel and copper. It's designed to at this area here. But if you pump a patient full of cobalt or chromium, the cobalt will outcompete it and create essentially a hapten, which is essentially a foreign material. It's like a virus. This is the guy here. Now, this is the joint fluid. Albumin and other proteins are constantly being recycled. Your body is constantly eating itself and representing itself to see if there's any viruses there. You're constantly attacking your own body. Now, when albumin is ingested by a macrophage, it's broken down, it's acidified, and it's chopped up like a sausage factory. This MHC gene, this is what encodes, you're genetically programmed for this carrier to pick up certain peptides. If you have one type of gene, you'll pick up this gene, protein. If you have another, you'll pick up another. And this is what determines what you then present to passing lymphocytes. So if you're implanted with the same material or the same virus, your MHC genes will determine how your body reacts, how quickly it will respond. Now, we thought that basically patients who get metal reactions are likely to present this area here and activate lymphocytes. That's your T lymphocytes. HLA genes. So this structure is all important to whether a reaction starts or not. This is the structure of an MHC gene. It's like a lock and key. So MHC gene is the lock, is the key, is the lock even, and a peptide is the lock. And your mum gives you one half of your structure, your dad gives you the other half of the structure. So another patient might have a different lock. They will respond differently to COVID, they will respond differently to an implant, yeah? It's standard. Now I have to say here, I am extremely exotic. I have my mother's side, which is from one side of Rochdale, and the other side, which is from the other side of Rochdale. So I was very unique set of genes. Now, in terms of other medicine, this is standard. Multiple sclerosis, patients have genes which will fit neural structures, and they will respond, they will present their own neural structures. Celiac disease, you have structures that will mop up gluten peptides, so you're more likely to react to wheat. Makes sense, hopefully. Phase 1 of this study in 2017, we essentially confirmed that. This is the first time this has ever been done, and we did find that patients who were responding to lower wear have different types of genes to patients who don't respond. However, you develop metal sensitivity with normal genes or background genes if you're exposed to large amounts of metal. So it explains why the ASR, with its high wear, created lots of alval. But you have other joints that are causing reactions with lower wear. We compared these, obviously, as well, as I should say, to patients at 10 years asymptomatic follow-up. Phase 2, so we had some success there. So the phase 2, we increased the numbers. We also added in some fairly technical statistics. We put in peptide binding. You can actually quantify with a specific gene how likely it is to present these peptides. We don't need to go into that too much, but that was into the increased numbers. We confirmed those findings. Phase 3, we then took it to the US, and we took it to Australia, and we accumulated the data to quite a large data set with these next generation sequencing with 620 patients. Then we created a machine learning algorithm. So we developed it on 70% of the data and then tested it on 30%. The New York guy, that's one of the patients. He's got a celebrity clinic. This is the Undertaker. He's still wrestling, 6'10", 300 pounds with a hip resurfacing. You know, anyone who says that these are always bad is, you know, I challenge you with that particular patient. So as you all might want to know, how influential are the genotypes? These are female patients with metal hips. These are the ones that do bad, yeah. These are the ones that everyone's banned from using. These are the survival curves. That's a female with less than 2 micrograms per litre. They've got about a 3% risk of developing alval, about 15 years. This is the higher risk genotypes, not the single highest risk, but one of them. You'll see there's a stepwise reduction in the survival. There's about a 3-fold elevated risk if those patients have those genes. You see how the risk goes up as the cobalt level goes up. That's cobalt 2 to 4. But there's also a decrease as well with the higher risk genes as well. And again, females do extremely bad as the cobalt goes higher. They do even worse if they're the higher risk genotypes. Now, if you just select for the actual low risk genotypes, you end up with actually fairly good survival. The males, just to simplify the graph, because I knew I'd be running short of time here, all patients with increased wear, so all patients with cobalt levels greater than 2, so these are going up to, you know, 250, whatever, but just splitting them into 2, those are your patients with the lower risk, those are your patients with the higher risk. So you're not immune from developing sensitivity, but it's all a direct relationship of genotype interaction with metal exposure. I won't bore you with that. Basically, we've got good predictive power with this algorithm. We've got a test that you input cobalt chrome level genotype, we can give you the predicted risk of an active metal sensitivity reaction developing. This is an example of the format of the report. We basically give you this patient's risk over time of alval and compare it to the background comparator lower risk genotypes. It's hard to go into right now, but please ask us about this. This is ready. This will be ready and available and MHRA approved in the next week or so. The question is, and this is a deliberately controversial question, is hip resurfacing dead and gone? I think most people would actually agree. Maybe this guy might say otherwise, but I would argue if you can identify preoperatively the patients who are more likely to become sensitized, is the hip resurfacing viable? The big question is the application to total knees for me. We know metal on metals going out, if not gone. We know that there's professional guidance. We know that all surgeons think that these give you terrible metal reactions, yeah? It's not argued. But what's a real eye-opener, I really didn't realize this until I started looking into it. What's the difference between a metal-on-metal hip with cobalt chrome, that's the medical grade alloy? None of the surgeons in the room basically think patients with knees get metal reactions, or very few, very rare. It's the same alloy that you're implanting. Sometimes, commonly, it's the same number of cobalt chrome components. Admittedly, they don't rub together, but does that really matter? The potential for adverse reaction, I'm saying perceived, is low. The perceived metal release is low. The perceived cobalt chrome as a significant issue is no. The number of publications on metal ion data with metal-on-metal hips is an explosion in published data. There's over 500 papers. There's less than 10 on knees. And it's just, this says it perfectly, really. It's a debated issue, whether metal sensitivity is an issue in knees. I think most people would say probably not. But when you actually look at the data, even in a perfect environment of a knee simulator, over 10% of the wear debris is metallic. That's in the idealized environment. That's the simulator. And then you actually start looking at the published ion data, and you see that the patients with knees, their ranges of cobalt routinely go up and beyond 2, which is the level I would argue is clinically relevant. That's going up to 8 in this patient group here. That's not just an isolated paper. This is another one. The median level there in a total knee, over 3 parts per billion, 3 micrograms per liter. That's the area I would say is clinically relevant. That is the area where you start to develop inflammatory responses. There's another one there, 1.3, ranges up to 3, and it's increasing over time as well. And I hear you say, and we'll finish off here, you're all saying, but knees don't fail because of alval. No, they don't, do they? You know, you never see metal reactions. That's just the metal-on-metal problem, isn't it? Well, maybe if you look, it's more common than you think. There's a paper in Journal of Arthroplasty, highly respected journal. They went back and re-reviewed a large number of revision patients. They actually found high-grade alval in about 7 to 8% of the revisions, and Lombardi found perivascular lymphocytic infiltrate, i.e. alval, in almost 1 in 5 of all the revised cases. And most interestingly, both these patients said the histological grade of the T-cell response was directly related to the pain preoperatively. I would argue strongly that unexplained pain cases, which can, in many reports, reach up to 20%, might have a metallic reaction component that we're missing. Finally, moving forward, the whole point of the meeting here is that I think we've got something new. I think we're leading the way. We're miles ahead in explant analysis. We're miles ahead in genetic analysis. We've got amazing research partners like Vicky Rands, got amazing researchers in the region like Mike Reed. There's a whole host of people here from various hospitals in the Northeast. And I think together, genuinely, we can really make a very big worldwide impact. As I said, we are ahead right now. If we push, I think we can really dominate the world on this. We've said arthritis is a big societal problem. Nobody's looking at explants. We're miles ahead. Nobody's looking at genetics to the degree that we are. We're first movers. We've got the expertise. We've even managed to just last year knock out a paper, and we identified genes that protect you from severe COVID disease because we're a flexible company and we can move quicker than bigger corporate manufacturers can. And what ideally I would like to see is that we become an orthopedic genetic database set up here that we can apply to other countries, neglected countries like India, China, that have completely different gait patterns, different analysis, different genetic makeup. 23andMe, only a few years ago, was just this crappy knockoff, tell me I'm 127th Jamaican. And now they're actually leading the world in genetic research. The Nature papers in COVID are actually actively collaborating with 23andMe. And I genuinely think we can do that for orthopedics. It's a case of working together to not throw any explants out, because that's critical. Every explant come with DNA sample, come for metal ion analysis, and come for biomarkers. So we don't just look for metal reactions, we look for everything. And I think we can do this. We obviously need that as well, and that's the complicated bit. You need to look at patients who are very happy as well 10 years post-operatively. Okay, thank you.